This is a production of Cornell University.
Dr. Kreuser on here today. Obviously has done a lot of research on PGRs and growth. Frank, we'll get a little bit of intro where we're at in the growing season here from you, and then we'll turn it over to Bill and get some questions answered here.
Excellent, and big thanks to Bill for taking the time to join us. This is a real treat, something that we don't get to talk about very often. Mostly because I didn't think, a lot of guys were using PGRs. And certainly at the school district level, it didn't seem like they were using PGRs. But I think since we've been focusing on sports turf, Carl, we're really getting guys that are specializing. Sports turf management, much like golf course superintendents, have been working to bring professionalism. Historically, greenkeepers were Bill Murray. And guys who are now professional like Dan Scheid and Ben Palmer, Greg Chorvis, all the people we have that are professional sports turf managers, it's a separate and distinct profession. And I think when you manage it at a high level, you have a lot of tools available. A lot of times at the school district level, unfortunately, because of restrictions, you don't have the same number of tools. So with that, no further ado, here we are again, trying to support each other through these difficult times. So again, thank you all for joining me and Carl. Let me get to my thing. So again, I can't say enough, right? As a responsible member of Cornell University, Cornell Cooperative Extension, any professional educational organization, my first responsibility to you is to make sure you're keeping safe and that I'm reminding you of it, right? This is a time when we're all asked to sacrifice a lot for the value of human life, right? Where a lot of us are being told to lock down so that the weakest among us can continue to survive. But at the same time, we've got to take care of ourselves. And it doesn't appear that this virus discriminates. And now that we're hearing more stories of people that have got it, it's not something everybody wants to go through. So new information as of yesterday, 1:30 in the afternoon, the governor indicated that horticulture is no longer deemed an essential business unless you're in the nursery greenhouse business selling food producing plants. This is New York State. For those of us that are talking outside of New York State, let me encourage you to get some clarity on this issue, because with all the confusion around, having clarity on, can I work? And then the question is, what should you do? Right? Or what is essential if you have to do things or can do things. So right now in New York State, by definition, most of the people probably listening to this can't work in the horticulture business as we would describe landscape horticulture to a certain extent. Now, at the same time, people are enjoying our landscapes as much as they ever have. In fact, the parks are now having to really get in there and say, hey, we know you're all out here, but, you got to keep your distance. And I took this off of Ben Palmer. Ben, I stole a couple of things. If you're with us, I stole a couple of things from your Twitter account. I just love following you. Real good professional approach to what you're doing. Put signs up. If you got sports fields that activity is banned, then put up the sign. Say you can't have group activities here. Apologize for the poor quality that I pulled off of Twitter. But the idea of signage is really important. And I think you see it in the STMA communication to you guys as a profession. The STMA is, hey, what are the things you got to do? Well, Ben also said, hey, this is weird. I got to spray off the stuff that's, showing up. And it happens to be a picture of a plant growth regulator. Good thinking, Ben. So, how do you deal with this internally with these processes that you've never given a second thought to? That's what's required to keep yourself safe. Right now, we have an opportunity where we're not all geared up yet. We're not all geared up. I mean, no one's mowing like crazy. There shouldn't be a crazy amount of stuff going on yet. Now's the time to plan for when there are things to do and you got one person to do them, because that person can go and do them as society starts to loosen up. We may be weeks from that. And so now planning is critical. And I'll just reiterate to this group again, how much I love this publication as a starting point, as just a starting point, right? Where you look at your crew, how do I keep safe? Because now in the golf course arena, we're starting to get crews that are getting infected. So I'll get to that in a second. I think I got it right here. Sorry. I had the slides, one drop out of order. The Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, GCSAA, has a pandemic resource for golf that outlines what happens if somebody on your crew is test positive. And they're doing this obviously because, golf is still allowed for about 75% of America. And these people are going in and doing essential work. I don't know if they're governed under the New York State rule that you can't work in horticulture, which means golf courses have to be let go, which means people can play, but you're not going to manage them. There's a lot of confusion. But for you as a manager, if somebody on your crew tests positive, if someone is still going to work, there is something deemed essential in that operation. These kinds of responses and information, are enormously critical. Now, I want to get to Bill right away. So let me just say again, this is one of the things we'd be doing in the spring. If no play, then focus on preventing vegetation if you can work, or communicate to people what the startup time, right? If we're not going to be able to work for the next 3 weeks, let's say this is for real. You can't go in and cut 3-4 weeks, right? You better start thinking about, what am I going to tell people how long it's going to take me to get this field in shape? And of course, in some cases, this is a place where a synthetic field is likely to get ramped up more quickly, right? Than a natural grass field if it's not regularly maintained. So lots of things to consider there. Here's that message. Where are we? Soil temperatures are still relatively cool, but progressing, right? That we're getting into the low 50s in the New York City metropolitan area. We're still in the 30s and 40s throughout much of New York State. And you see throughout much of the the New England region, continuing to see cool soil temperatures. Temperature departures are still indicating slightly above normal throughout much of the Northeast, unless you're to the west end of the region, out in Pittsburgh and out towards the Great Lakes. There was some warm air that's been leaking up that way. But there isn't a big growth surge expected this week. Forecasts for the week moving forward, this has been updated a little bit to show some progression, but in general, we shouldn't see much progression of the growing season over the next several days. Now, Jimmy Simpson, the current STMA president and certified sports field manager in the town of Cary, I thought took a bold step. He in his president's message, he said it's okay to let things go. 5 small things that may make walking away from our fields a little easier. I'd say this is a good place to start and does a really good job of introducing our topic with Bill today about plant growth regulators. Now, I know Bill twitches a little bit when we put this up there because it is not necessarily as precise as we'd like it to be. I think for people that don't give a second thought to how grass grows, it's not a bad starting point. Bill's going to give us a lot more information about this as we talk forward. But a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be related to Height of Cut. And we're going to recommend his blog that, again, has been primarily set up for the golf guys, but has really good information there about mowing height and Height of Cut stuff. And I'll just give him an intro. I had the pleasure of working with Bill for so many years when he was here doing his PhD, and it was literally the time off he took. He took time off to teach me something to go back and then do this Greenkeeper app blog. And I think what we're going to talk about today, Bill, is growth rate, grass type, and how Height of Cut and mowing at the 1/3 rule, or what I'm trying to get, mow 30, something that's simple for people to remember. If you can work, here's how it's going to go. So let's, without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you. And then and Carl, we can give Bill the screen if he wants to show some slides, Bill. But I just say, first off, what are you hearing from sports turf managers in Nebraska? Are people asking you these questions? Because obviously, maybe your work rules are different than ours here in New York. So let's start with what guys are thinking about in Nebraska right now.
Yeah, one thing I'm noticing is this morning we have our par 3 golf course that we take care of with the city of Lincoln, and my students take care of it. So we had to get out there because, like you said, golf is, for us, landscape has been deemed as part of that essential maintenance. So we're okay here in Nebraska, and our golf courses are packed. We pushed, they had a person on every tee box yesterday on our par 3 course. The 18-hole courses are full. people are walking through parks. We're having these same issues where, sports fields on campus are being used even though they're not being maintained and shouldn't be used. And so it's really, people are in this, what should we be doing? What's essential? And even for us, I mean, we're talking with our students this morning and about maintenance of the golf course. And if we're still doing 150 people a day on a par 3 course, the maintenance standards are still, we're not going to the bare minimalists because we need a crew. And, par 3 course, we have a crew of 2 full-time and a couple of part-time students that help out, too. So it's easy for us to do social distancing and continue to do maintenance. But you really wonder, what's the level of acceptable minimalism, honestly. And so instead of saying just stop doing everything, the concept we've been promoting is let's just do things that have to be done when they need to be done and not just do things to do things, right? And so that's kind of what we're seeing. I'll say this, it's going to get colder this week, and we have a system coming through, freezing rain tomorrow, but we were mid-70s last few days, and then it looks like low 80s coming here in the center part of the country next week with some more rain. So the soil temperatures are getting 50. When we see 50, I see tall fescue bluegrass start really breaking, and we start to see growth really starting to push now. So it's going to be this make or break time of now I have to start acting. And our sports turf people that normally would be pushing right now are kind of wondering, how do I prevent that normal spring push that they would like during normal spring baseball when there's nothing going on? And so I think that's kind of where we are in Nebraska, is things are really ramping up and maintenance is needing to happen. So how do we push that back?
That's right. So you're right. First off, in the golf world, we're saying, listen, if golf's allowed, it's what do you have to do, right? And again, if you get a positive on your crew and you haven't broken up into teams, now you're really behind the 8 ball because you may have one person. Yeah. Right? You may have 2 people if anybody can get out there. So yeah, there's that scenario of about trying to keep up with what you're doing. And the other part is people are going to go on these fields. Putting up signs would be important to do for the focused activity. Listen, people just want to walk around on these fields. Maybe 3 people kicking the ball here and there randomly, not in particular areas. That may still happen. That does beg the question, how much will the turf handle before you really got to get growth going to keep up with it? So there's that question. But where we are here, Bill, we're right maybe a week behind you. We're not going to be anywhere near 80s up here in the Northeast, but our soil temperatures are creeping into the 50s. So the first thing I heard you say is your tall fescue is going to get going right out of the gate. A lot of us have tall fescue fields, Kentucky bluegrass fields, probably overseeded with rye. So one of the things you got in sports is you oftentimes have this, Heinz 57, and we control it a little bit in golf because we mow the crap out of it all the time. We're not always playing around with the different growth rates because we mow so frequently. But in sports, and when we raise the height, now we could see the different growth rates. So can you go through, number one, when would you start thinking about triggering it? If somebody said to you, listen, you can get out to your fields one more time in the next week, or you can go out once a week, what's the trigger to start, and where would you start?
Yeah, I think, as you said, is mowing based on what the growth rate is and not just mowing to hit, well, I mow 3 times a week, especially early in the season when we just may not really need to. We did research for 5 years on tall fescue, and then we did some buffalo grass because it's Nebraska and you got to do buffalo grass research, right? But we did those 2 species and looking at different mowing heights and frequencies. And, mowing to that 1/3 rule or the 30% removal, mow 30, that produced the best quality of turf with the fewest number of mowings. And so if you really do need to back things off, keeping track of that. And so there's 2 ways that we can slow our growth rates down or reduce our mowing. One is you mow higher so that it takes longer to hit that mowing threshold. And then the other side is what can you do to actually slow growth rate down? So if we mow higher, if we're normally mowing at, 1.5 inches and you have to mow at 2 inches, if you mow at 2 inches, now you get to 3 inches. And so if the growth rate is the same, regardless if it's mowing at 1 inch or 3 inches, it's going to take more days to hit that threshold. So that's the one approach. And then from another approach is to slow it down, and that's how do we use PGRs? How do we limit our spring fertility? Can we let things be dry if we're not, not add water to the system, just get natural rainfall, which, in the spring generally isn't a problem for most places with soil water limitations. But those are the two approaches that we can take to try to minimize that mowing so that we don't have to have that crew there. So if you do have a situation where you lost some part of your crew, maybe one person could, keep up with the general mowing so that we don't have to mow it up at 4 inches and then try to scalp it back down once everything starts to get back to normal. So.
And so your point about raising the height of cut is critical, because what I'm thinking about in the back of my mind in all the years, and I know you know it, especially true with tall fescue, I would assume, there's this phase it goes into where I don't want to say it's exponential, because everybody's getting a sense now of what exponential means, right? Watching a curve go up. But we get a greater surge of growth in the early spring. There's a soil temperature that typically occurs. You got some pretty good data on what you've seen on tall fescue. Let's focus on tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. That makes it a little bit easier to talk. Let's say I got a field I normally keep at 2 inches, right? I know I'm going to grow more than 1/10 of an inch a day in springtime, just by normal mineralization of nitrogen, right? So in anticipation of that growth surge, I want to wait, right? I think I want to let my normal 2-inch field go to 3 inch and then mow it when it gets to 4.5. Do you like those specific increments as mowing height focus to reduce growth rate?
Yeah, definitely. And, what we found in our mowing is that actually not scalping actually causes the grass to grow faster. So don't take that approach. The routine mowing puts a little bit of a plant, we think it's a herbivory response type of a thing. And so the plant senses the damage through some of the things that we studied together at Cornell about,
Right.
pattern recognition receptors.
Right.
It can actually sense, am I being munched on by a cow or by a mower or by an insect, to turn on defense pathways. And that results in the growth rate slowing down. And so by mowing to the 1/3 rule or more frequent, we are naturally going to suppress our growth rate by about 20-ish%, maybe 30% would be my eyeball number without actually running the math right now. So I'm getting a slowdown just by mowing routinely. But then if you start mowing more than the 1/3 rule, so like just weekly or the quarter rule, so you're only removing 1/4 of the leaf at one mowing instead of 1/3 of the leaf. Then we're just doing unnecessary mowings. Yes, the quality was better, and we all know that. That's why we mow our fields 2-3 times a week, because they look better. But if we're trying to just minimize things, we're still going to have healthy grass with fewest number of mowings at the 1/3 rule, and going to that higher height gives us a longer time interval to hit that number. And just for some perspective, in areas where we see freeze and thaw cycles, I pulled some research that was done in prairie soil. So just think, and which is similar to a grass. You have a lot of organic matter, healthy soils, like what we're trying to maintain. If you eyeball some of their research results and interpolate how much fertilizer was released during the winter, it can be in the soil with a lot of organic matter about 1 pound of fertilizer per 1,000. So imagine going out during the winter and putting down 1 pound of N, and that's why we see this huge bursts of growth. And this is why we say don't fertilize late in November, because if you're getting 1/2 pound in November and even if half of that stays in the soil, now you got 1 1/4 pounds of fertilizer there for the plant. And as soon as that soil's hit about 50 degrees, so for tall fescue and bluegrass, the number that I've kind of been monitoring honestly for 10 years is that when the soil's hit about 55 degrees, we start to see really rapid regrowth. So it seems like that's when those plants really start breaking dormancy and starting to grow. For ryegrass and annual bluegrass and poatriv, we see it a little earlier, maybe in the mid 40s. And so we're seeing the ryegrass right here and the triv and the bluegrass really starting to green up. And the tall fescue is kind of a dog. The bentgrass is really a dog. And the bluegrasses, depending on the cultivar, can vary. Some of the old bluegrasses will green up like the annual bluegrass. Some of the new bluegrasses, the lomos, the ones that don't make much GA, they need to get a lot warmer. So they're almost like a bentgrass in which they like it really warm for them to really kind of get going.
And I don't want to complicate this because it can get complicated really fast. You just ask a golf course superintendent, look at the Greenkeeper app. You got 300 and some odd models in predicting mowing height and type of grass and region, PGR, rate, all these things that factor in. Two things. One is when you mow higher, one of the reasons these guys are mowing low more frequently is it increases density and theoretically should lead to greater traffic tolerance. Certainly Vanini, some of the guys at Michigan State showed that many, many years ago. That's, but that's for play. So first, what you said earlier, don't always do things you've always done because it's, not the way it's always been. When you mow higher, you get a thinning in the stand as well, Bill, right? You get this thinning of the stand. You get fewer plants. And I want to talk a little bit about bringing it back to play. How hard, let's say, you're going to let it go. You're not going to be able to mow for 2 weeks right now. It's probably 4 or 5 inches. You go back there. You would say, set the mower as high as you can and just try to bring it down. If you can work a day, cut it at 4 and then cut it at 3.5 and then cut it at 3. Is that what you'd recommend? I know this is crazy because we're not even getting into the growth regulator thing. It's more what you can do to manage it to keep it under wraps here because it might not be sense to put a PGR now. Tell me about letting it go up and come down as you've studied it.
Well, this is one of those things from the 5 years of doing this. What we notice is early in the season, the scalping isn't as severe because the grass really doesn't become accustomed to that higher mowing height. It's really when you're maintaining it at, say, 4 inches for a long period of time that there's enough shading down near the crown that a lot of those green leaves are gone. So then when you scalp, bam, it goes away. And so that's, one of the bigger concerns. So if this would be like a really temporary thing where they said you can't mow and you couldn't get out there for 2 weeks, and they said, okay, well, I guess you have to mow a little bit. If, maybe violating the 1/3 rule slightly isn't going to be as bad. And we see homeowners do this all the time. And so I'm a little more, confident in that because you'll see homeowners go 6 inches and then mow it to 2.5 inches. And sometimes it looks okay. But if you're doing it all the time, that's when we're seeing these long-term differences. And so it depends on the time scale. If it's been months of mowing at even 4 inches, and now you're trying to get back to 1.25 inches for fall sports, then yeah, taking that approach like you would for a putting green, of bringing it down incrementally would be the way to go, just so that that plant can start making green foliage down in the canopy. So you're going to mow it shorter, let some more light down in the canopy. The plant will respond by making new leaves to fill those voids. And so that's one way we can do it. And then, another thing about that too is transitioning into the PGRs. The PGRs will help to sustain that density. So if we're worried about that natural lower canopy thinning, we can use the PGRs to help us keep that density higher during this period.
And again, not to make it complicated, but in your work, you actually found some Kentucky bluegrasses you don't think produce gibberellins because you can't get growth regulators that block gibberellins to work on them. So
honestly, we did models for ryegrass fields and fairways, and they work really well. We've applied to some tall fescue and had no problems. And these are both faster growing species. If we go to common bluegrasses, no problem. You put the PGRs down, you see a very repeatable type of pattern like we noticed. Older fields. You go to these newer cultivars though, and it just doesn't, we don't see a response. And sometimes we even see a little stimulation in growth rate from some of the PGRs. It's wild. And at first you question yourself, like, what did I do wrong? But then when you have different labs finding the same results on different newer cultivars, then you start to build trust, like, we're doing everything right here and we're still seeing this response. It wasn't a one-time thing. And so when it comes to these really low, slow growing bluegrasses, we don't always see a response. And if you think about it, it makes sense in terms of another kind of a pest. If you were going to go spray for snow mold in July, you're probably going to have minimal type of a response to your snow mold because it's not conducive weather for that pathogen to grow. So if you have bluegrass that doesn't make gibberellin, the hormone that is inhibited by these PGRs, and that's why they grow slow, is because gibberellin causes the grass to grow vertically. If it's not making gibberellin and you put something down to inhibit it, what are you inhibiting? Nothing. And so you don't see a response. And so that's been kind of the issue we've been seeing with some of these products is, you might see a marginal minimalist response, and then you'll go to a variety that produces like a Kentucky 31 tall fescue or older bluegrasses that grow really vigorously. That means that they produce a lot of the hormone gibberellin. Therefore, they are much more sensitive to these PGRs, and we'll see a lot more reduction in the growth rate.
Okay, so I've got a tall fescue Kentucky bluegrass sports field that I normally keep at 2 inches in the northeastern United States. And let's imagine I've cut it. It's heading into that sort of active period of growth, maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Do you have a particular growth regulator? I showed a picture of Ben's use of T-Nex. The plant growth regulator, it's the knockoff Primo. It's the generic Primo. Do you have a particular growth regulator that you like for higher cut turf, tall, cool season turf in the 2-inch range? And then we can get into the growing degree day thing. Let's start with the product that you like and what your work shows.
Yeah, so I've tested them all. If you can, maybe I'll just do a screen share here quick, and I can just show you a table of the different PGRs we've tested. So are you seeing this full screen now?
Yeah.
All right, so you got Primo on this side, on the right. You got no Primo on that side. And this is an older mix of, probably, at this point, this was mid, like 2007. The stand was probably seeded in the late 90s. And so we can see the difference in color and density that is there from applying Primo at 0.2 fluid ounces. And so we definitely see that sunken growth result. And
Darker
so if I
green
look
too.
at
darker green too.
Darker green, yeah. And so
I know Pam Sherratt has shown that, right? Pam has shown late season primos sometimes has led to that darkening as well, right, Bill?
Well, and that's the thing that you'll see that on all turf. So if you stay on your programs right away, and stay all the way to the end of the growing season, and I don't like applying it at the end of the year when the grass has actually stopped growing, but if you continue to spray your PGR program all the way until grass growth rate stops, you will see that the improvement of turf quality and density and color over winter if you get snow cover. If, like in Nebraska, we don't get frequent snow cover, our leaves die all the way to the crown. It doesn't make a difference. All the grass is brown. But like when I lived in New York and Wisconsin, Great Lakes, regions with snow cover, when the snow cover is gone, you will still notice it. I remember we even saw that on our bent grass greens, and so that was like, what did you do to these greens already? And it was like nothing. It was residual from the past year. And so this is kind of a result you can get when you don't have too much growth suppression. And so that's kind of an idea there of what this looks like. Or here's another picture of it where you can see the dark green on the left and then the control on the right. And you can get an idea of what kind of benefits are going to be.
So Primo is something you can spray. It is burned through at your growing degree day model. Again, for folks that aren't paying attention to PGRs and what we're talking about, these products are either processed in the plant or processed in the soil. And Bill's figured out from collecting clippings for 27 years of his life how they respond, and has been able to determine what these intervals are and ways of keeping growth suppressed by following that. So that's just an entry point. And Primo is the one I think you started studying, but now have studied all of them, huh?
Yeah, so if I go here really quick, you can kind of see just our different trends. And this is on bluegrass. And we'll see, this is a new. So we put down the Primo at day 0, and we'll notice this constant suppression and then rebound. And so we're trying to maintain this suppression where the dots are below this dash line. That means the grass is growing slower.
So that one line is everything below that line is growing at a slower rate relative to untreated, no PGR plants.
The theoretical, if you didn't put down a PGR, it would be growing at this line of 1. So what we want to do was apply the PGR frequently enough. And so what we want to do was reapply somewhere around here. So in this product for a new and bluegrass, this would be at field height bluegrass at 15 ounces per acre. It'd be around 400 growing degree days. If we go past that, then the grass starts to grow faster rate. And so we want to reapply here to maintain that suppression. And you'll notice that we have a low rate of anew versus a high rate of anew, and we just get a little bit better, a little more suppression at the high rate, but the reapplication interval doesn't really change. And so with the PGRs, the application rate impacts the amount of suppression, where air temperature impacts how long these products last. So that's the real take-home point. But then you have products like this. And what do? You put down Cutlass on these bluegrass fairways or fields, and there's every point is at or maybe even slightly above level of the control. And we've seen this over and over and over, multiple sites. So that's been an odd one for us. Same thing with Trim It. Low rated Trim It, 16 ounces, didn't see much. Had to go up to 32 ounces an acre, and then I saw a lot of suppression. So just keeping those ideas there. And so we get this table.
So you like Trim It, and just by that, before you summarize it, you like Trim It for a heavy regulation, and Trim It also gives a lot of guys that can't spray the ability to sling some granules if this is a strategy they're going to need in a month from now.
Yeah. And so if you look at this table, we have the low rate for fields to the high rate for each PGR. So you got Primo, Trim It, Cutlass, and you can get an idea. And interestingly, the Trim It, we just didn't see a lot of suppression for this bluegrass. And so again, it depends a lot on cultivar, I think. And so this is when I talk about these models for golf turf, we do see cultivar effects, but nowhere near what we see with the bluegrass. And so, this cultivar doesn't seem to respond as well to the root absorb products, the Trim It and the Cutlass, but it did. We did see good results from the foliar products, the Primo Max and the Anew. And so it's just kind of interesting, some of those results. So, the field, the sports turf is a little bit interesting.
So
ryegrass, same thing.
Yeah, okay, good. Ryegrass. That was the one. The other one was, go back to that, the concoctions, the different mixes. Because I know in golf, you talk a lot about those combinations. And so in those cases, on sports turf where you're not sure what variety you got, I mean, one way of determining is, do you normally have a hard time getting that field to wake up in the spring? Like we do at Cornell. We've got a soccer field that we cut at 1.25 inches. It's sod type, midnight type, compact America type varieties produced on the sod farm. We have had some good success, oddly enough, with Trim It, but we went out at a pretty good rate. I think we were close into the 30-ounce range for that. What do you think about the combination products?
Yeah, the combination products work fine. So we're seeing, interestingly, again, sometimes these data aren't always the most clear things in the world, especially in the bluegrasses, where the legacies seem to do really well, but then Musketeer, which is legacy plus paclobutrazol, which is generally a product that really can shut down growth, we didn't have as good of suppression on. And so those are pre-mixed formulations. And so maybe how they've formulated that didn't provide the same level of result for just this cultivar of bluegrass. The ryegrasses, we look at them, they respond much more consistently. We see a really nice suppression, and then it kind of wore off. And the thing you'll notice for our models in Nebraska is that we never really had this big growth surge afterwards. And the reason there, we think, is in Nebraska in the summer, it's miserably hot and humid, and the ryegrass just doesn't have the juice to really have that big rebound. And so after the suppression wore off, things were kind of done for that product. So, and then here's kind of like your Trim It. And you're gonna notice again here is we have the low rate versus the higher rates. And we'll still see these same low rates have more suppression or less suppression, high rates have a lot more suppression, but they all kind of wear off at the same time. And so really thinking about, what your application rate is doing is the more important thing to be considering. And if you need to start getting more suppression, if things are really like, I got to shut down and I don't care what that grass looks like, but you can't go at a higher rate because the label doesn't allow you to, well, then start adding different PGRs down or start tightening your intervals. So you're applying more frequently, which results in the PGR being applied more frequently than the plant can actually break it down. And so over time, you start to simulate a high rate by applying more and more frequently.
Bill, risk of injury. I want to start wrapping this up. A risk of injury Let's start with that. I know in the golf world, you talk about the risk of injury greater when we're growing slower. We're certainly growing slower. A lot of us have rye that grows more rapidly in with the bluegrass as well. So what kind of injury should we be bracing ourselves for?
It really depends. So look at this picture here on the bottom. This grass is the yellow line. It has 95% growth suppression, which is all the growth that occurs from gibberellin production. So I have zero gibberellin being made. There's no cell elongation. The cells are not growing. And any discoloration that you see there is not the actual discoloration of the grass. It is from the mower mowing the tips and fraying those tips. And we're seeing this brown hue on top as a result of that. So what it shows is that our traffic tolerance is greatly diminished because that grass can't recover and mow off the damaged tissue. But if we don't have any traffic on it, there's no real damage, especially if we're mowing to the 1/3 rule. So if I'm mowing this at the 1/3 rule, which would be maybe every 2 weeks or more, I'm not going to have any of this discoloration because I'm not going to be constantly mowing those tips every 2 days when they're not growing. So that's the bigger takeaway here is your growth rate needs to match what your traffic levels are. If you have a lot more traffic, you need more nitrogen to stimulate more growth to recover from that wear. If all of a sudden we've eliminated that traffic and we've really dialed our mowing back, we can handle 95% clipping yield suppression and still look okay because we don't need to grow any grass. And those leaves can just sit there and make sugar and be happy and make roots and everything can be okay.
So here's my last question, and I'm going to let you go because I'm sure Sam's around. I'm always happy to see him and see if he's around. If I say I want to start doing growth regulators, am I married to it? One of the things your work shows is, yeah, you get suppression, but if you don't maintain your intervals, which, gets to be a hassle if you can't reliably know when you can work, how would you factor in, listen, if you're going to do this, you got to keep doing it. Because if you stop, now you got more problems. So talk me through how I'm worried about rebound if I can't get back out there.
So that rebound is what happens after you apply the product. And after it wears off, all of the sugars and all of the things that were blocked now go forward and the grass grows. So you can take those same concepts, that temperature and growing degree days predict how long these products last. And if rate predicts how much suppression I'm getting, what you can do is if you want to go off the PGRs and go back to normal, you just start reapplying at the intervals that are recommended, which are in our Greenkeeper app, and those are freely available for sports turf users too. It's not just a golf app, even though it looks branded that way. Mm-hmm. And you just start reducing your rates back to normal, and you reduce it back to near zero. And then by doing that, you can minimize the potential to have this big growth surge occurring. So if you're during COVID and you're just like, I don't want any growth, and you're doing 30 ounces an acre of any PGR, and you're getting 80-90% suppression, then you start wearing that down, saying, I need some more growth now. Well, then do 20 ounces or 10 ounces and then kind of work your way back to zero. And that will minimize the risk of that rebound. And the other thing too is if you're trying to do this in the middle of July and it's really stressful as it is anyways, like on that ryegrass I showed before, it won't rebound. It's too stressed out to do the rebound. And so you can just cut it off and you probably won't have too many problems that way either. So it isn't like something where you start and you're just locked in for the whole season. Although I would recommend, sports turf managers to try a lower rate of these products to get a little bit of suppression, because it is going to increase that density. It's going to increase plant health qualities. It's going to reduce fertility requirements. And so being at maybe a 5 or 10 ounce rate of Trinexapac or a 8 to 10 ounce rate of a new things like that, they're going to give us a little bit of suppression. We'll see a lot of benefit from to stay on that all season long.
All right, perfect. Great. Carl, do we have questions either for myself or Bill to answer before we wrap it up?
We've got no questions, and I think you guys really covered a lot, especially talking about how high you can kind of go before you see the plant physically change and how it starts to become more difficult to return. I thought that was a big one we addressed today. And, the PGR is really understanding how and when you're going to be able to use those. The species thing is something we didn't get into last week, but really differentiating between things like bluegrass and tall fescue and ryegrass, I think was great for everybody to hear, because that's a deeper discussion, but certainly relevant for a lot of people listening. So
and that's one of those things. That's one of those things. Like in Greenkeeper, yeah, there's 600 PGR models, and they are all specific to the product, the species, and the mowing height. So if you decide to use your Greenkeeper app and you go in to set up your course and you had your area as athletic field type, the system knows that's a field and it's ryegrass. And when you put down trim it, this is the growing degree day interval. This is how much suppression you're getting. It already accounts for that information. And so all you have to do is tell it the day you applied, and then go to your homepage, it will automatically keep track of your growing degree days for you. So you don't have to think about it. And now we're releasing this feature where if you said did primo and trim it, and then 3 days later you did a new, it would start combining all three of those applications and telling you how much suppression are you getting in total, not just I'm getting 20% here, 15% there, 45% here. And even in the golf world now, we just started building models for DMI fungicides, and now we can even account for how much suppression you're getting from tebuconazole or propiconazole and all those DMIs that potentially have some growth inhibiting effects.
That's right, because there are going to be some higher end sports operations, even sand-based fields that might have annual bluegrass in them, or Kentucky bluegrass with necrotic ring spot, any of these root-borne pathogens. And they're going to use a DMI fungicide because it's allowed and it's effective. They're going to get enhanced growth suppression from some of those. So that's why, Bill, we've been really stressing it. And I got to tell you, big kudos again for creating Greenkeeper. And I'm really glad now that we're really directly telling sports field managers they can use it. There's models in there that are friendly for their use. I think this is going to give us a better understanding of how to use these tools and data. When you can't get in, or you got to justify why you're going into work, you got to have data to say, okay, here's why I'm doing it. Smart guys say, this is essential. I want to raise the height so we don't have a field that looks like a cow pasture when we get back there in June or July, which who knows.
Yeah, instead of just saying, oh, I have to be in there, if you have some kind of a model or something that can say, look, I have to be there because my grass is this high and it has to be mowed at this height, or I have to apply my summer patch because the soils are the right temperature. It's a lot easier to get an exemption or justification than, well, I just do it because that's what we got to do these times of the year. And they're going to say, well, it's different times of the year, so I'll just deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's helpful.
And I got to tell you, this is where the golf guys have gone awry. They've determined these things to be essential, that I don't think we're having these kinds of minimal conversations, even when there's not play. There's twitching going on because they can't do the things that they normally want to do. And I think we got to be better about getting the data to justify what we're doing. Okay, Carl, I'll keep rambling. Is there any other questions?
There is a good question from Jason Crawford. Are PGRs restricted in New York State on K through 12 grounds?
Yes. Yeah, they have an EPA number, so you can't use them on school grounds.
Yeah. Now, the only thing I will say is Bill, you're mentioning about exemptions, emergency exemptions. There is a way you can get an emergency exemption for these K through 12 grounds at school districts. And, if you can make the case, and I think you might be able to if you get some of Bill's data, which is saying, if I can use PGRs, I don't have to come in as frequently, and I don't have to mow as much. That could be a way for you to justify an emergency exemption of a pesticide. Whether or not that it gets through, the DEC or whatever, I'm not sure. But
and the other thing too, there with that same line of thinking is the growing ingredient models predict when the PGRs are not in the plant anymore. So if you're closed and you have a model to tell you, with pretty good certainty that there's no product left that I have to reapply, now you have a re-entry interval that is a little bit more than just 12 hours. You can say, look, at this product is having an effect for this many growing degree days, which equates to 2 weeks. So, if we're going to be shut and no one's on the field anyways for 2 weeks, I can reduce my mowing. And then just look at the product labels, because some of them don't have labels for sports turf. So just check, like maybe some of the class Bs, the root absorber products. Like I don't want to say anything off the top of my head because I don't know for a fact. But just check the label for a sports turf on there. And if you can get that exemption and it's on the label, then then you'd be okay as long as you had that exemption.
And I'll just add that, again, the Child Safe Playing Field Act, for those listening in New York, and we'll get this on tape for people who watch it, the Child Safe Playing Field Act, the emergency exemptions allows school districts and school boards to provide exemptions for pesticide use when it's deemed an emergency, as long as it's not routine. One of the things they've been trying to get away from is the routine application of pesticides in school grounds. And I think there is a case to be made, Carl, that this might be a nice little thing with data, EIQ, that we could put to it to make a nice little case that if this was a path you wanted to go and you had competent people to do it and deemed essential to do it, you could do it. So listen, we're way past where we normally are. And that's because, Bill, I could talk to you for 10 days about this thing, especially because we don't have these conversations about higher cut turf and sports fields. That's why particularly I wanted to have you on out here, and we can use this information in some of our lawn care thinking. We'll have a webinar tomorrow. Bill, safe all of you out in Nebraska. Thanks so much for joining us. Carl, pass it back to you and say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for joining you. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yep, next week, same time, same link, and we'll post. If we can get a guest next week or we come up with another topic, we'll certainly post that out on social media and our email list. So. Once again, thanks everybody for stopping by and hopefully getting some knowledge from Bill. Thanks a bunch for coming on and talking about that. Lots of obviously you got the 600 models there in Greenkeeper. Lots of clippings collection, leading to back surgery. So
hey, you did it too, Carl. I remember you being there working for us.
Thanks, Bill. See you guys.
Yeah, see you guys.
Thanks, Bill.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.